Hello, everybody. Advances in oncological treatment leading to better survival rates and improved public awareness of the age-related decline in fertility have led to the introduction of technical awareness in oocytes, embryos, and ovarian tissue cryopreservation technologies for both medical and social indications. Patients diagnosed with neoplastic or severe medical illness for which they will be treated with gonadotoxic treatment may elect to attempt to preserve their oocytes or ovarian tissue or embryos. In addition, single reproductive age women seeking to delay their fertility may also consider gametes cryopreservation as they attempt to fight off the age-related decline in fertility. IVF Worldwide is honored to host today Professor Claus Yding Andersen, who will discuss with us the topic Fertility Preservation Program in Denmark. Professor Andersen is the Scientific Director of the Laboratory of Reproductive Biology at the University Hospital of Copenhagen in Denmark and a Professor of Human Reproductive Physiology within the Faculty of Health and Medical Science at the University of Copenhagen. Professor Andersen was a member of the team that introduced IVF to Denmark in the mid-80s, and during the last 20 years, he is the head of the National Program of Cryopreservation of Human Ovarian Tissue and Testicular Tissue too. He is considered one of the pioneers in the field. Professor Andersen's major research contributions involve ovarian endocrinology, oocyte maturation, cryopreservation of gonadal tissue, human embryonic stem cell, and development of new principles of ovarian stimulation, including the introduction of the agonist trigger and novel approaches to luteal phase support. He has published more than 400 scientific papers. He is currently the chief editor of the reproductive section in Frontiers in Endocrinology. Claus, please.
Thank you very much. This was a very kind introduction. And thank you very much for allowing me to present some of the data on the Danish Fertility Preservation Program on IVF Worldwide. This is indeed an honor for me. And it is a very nice way to communicate in these times when it's not possible to meet physically. And I certainly do hope that we will be able to do that in the future. The really good message from Denmark today is that overall, we only have 4 patients now in Denmark, which is in ventilators. So we are going the right way. But let's have a look at the fertility preservation program in Denmark. As you see here on my front slide, this is what we often do is to document it by pictures. And this is a patient who's going to have a tissue transplanted. So before this is transplanted to the patient, we take this picture just to demonstrate, just for us to keep that this is the ampules we have actually stored out, and this was how the tissue looked when we got when it was transplanted. My outline today is that I would like to introduce to you how we particularly have developed ovarian tissue freezing from adult and children, because we have quite a lot of children in Denmark, and then we have been looking very much into the survival of follicles, because we think that do we need to do slow freezing, or do we need to do vitrification, and how many follicles actually do survive the freezing procedure. I'll demonstrate data on that. And then in Denmark, we have developed this system of transportation of ovarian tissue. So we only have one center where ovarian tissue is frozen, and all the other centers is transporting it to our center. And then I have this point, which is 2 for 1, which I think is very interesting. I know you have heard a little bit about it already, but this is the fact that when we freeze an ovary, we of course concentrate on the cortical tissue, the outer layer of the ovary, but the medulla tissue actually contains a lot of antral follicles, small antral follicles where you have immature oocytes, and this is a valuable source to augment fertility preservation for these patients. And then we have rare genetic diseases. You don't see them so often, but because we have a large program, we now start to accumulate some data which may be of interest to you, and then have a look at how we transplant tissue in Denmark. So I think that we need to set the stage first by seeing how is ovarian tissue done in Denmark, because this doesn't resemble very much how it's done other places in the world. In Denmark, it's fully reimbursed in the public healthcare system, so it doesn't cost the patient a penny. She will have her ovary taken out. There will be no fee from storage or handling of the tissue. When she wants it back, she can have done that for free. And we don't even take any charges for the subsequent IVF cycles. So, but on the other hand, then the public healthcare sector says this can only be done in women who is suffering from estrogen-induced risk of infertility and genetic diseases with a risk of POI. So basically, there's no private sector actors in Denmark. So this, of course, puts us in a very special position, and it allows us to sort of not look too stringent on the conditions on which we allow these patients to have their tissue frozen. For instance, age. I'll come back to that. As you are well aware, probably a lot of you, that the anatomical feature of the ovary, which allows us to freeze and store primordial follicles, is the simple fact that primordial follicles are located in the outer 1 millimeter of the ovarian cortex. So all the small white dots around this ovary is the primordial follicles. They are the only one which sustain freezing, whereas all the antral follicles are so large and so complex in their architecture that they do not sustain freezing. However, the primordial and primary follicles constitute more than 90% of all follicles present in any one ovary. So the fact that we can make these thin cortical slices is the very reason why this technique works so well. And the way we do it is that we normally retrieve one of the two ovaries. This is only done in patients who run the risk of being infertile. So the philosophy is that you take out 50% and put in the tank and leave the other 50 in there if she do not become menopausal. And then you can see that we isolate the outer 1 millimeter cortex of the ovary, cut them into appropriate pieces, often around 5 to 5 millimeter, and then around 1 millimeter thick. Freeze them, and then we store them out, and then you can transplant as many as you like to the remaining ovary or to other places in the peritoneum. I'll now run a video to show you how the procedure is performed in Denmark, and you can see this is our humble lab, and here we have an ovary. And this is now cut into two halves. Often we will be two persons in the flow bench working on that. And you can see now we are sitting with very sharp scalpels and just meticulously, slowly getting all our way down to the cortical tissue. And then we divide the cortex into pieces. And often the size of the pieces will depend a little bit on how big the ovary was. If it's a really huge surface area of the cortex, we will tend to make the pieces a little bit bigger. And now it's in the, it's moving fast now, it's in the cryoprotectant, and now we have frozen it, and now it's stored, and then you can see it goes into the tank. And there when we have reached this point, it can basically stay there for as long as we like. So this is the procedure, and if we look at, we do it a little differently with young girls, and you can see here, this is just a 3-year-old girl who have a very tiny ovary, and then you basically don't take very much of the medulla tissue here, because these ovaries are stuffed with follicles, and you just have to make it thin enough so that the cryoprotectants will get into all the cells and make sure that the cryopreservation, that the freezing process, that they can sustain the freezing. You can see we just take out a tiny bit of it, and basically whatever we take out anyway will contain a lot of follicles. But this is how it looks, and then you will make pieces here smaller. You can see we have a millimeter paper underneath, so we know how big we make the pieces. We will make them smaller because they're stuffed with follicles, so there will be a lot of follicles in each individual piece anyway. And then we also have a chance to divide it in the way that they are replaced. So this is how it looks, and this will go into the tank. And here again, we have now equilibrating the tissue on the shaker, and then it goes into the tank. We have developed this model the Danish model, which we have now been working with actually for more than 15 years. The model is that the woman stays, the tissue moves. If you can see my mouse, you can see this is Europe. The small 2 red dots up here in the north is Denmark. And the way we have developed it here, we have Denmark, we have Germany here, we have Sweden here. The way we have developed it is that we only freeze the tissue in Copenhagen. So when a woman is having a cancer in Jutland, she will be treated in Aarhus or Odense, and we also have southern Sweden on board now. And here the tissue will be taken out, and then it'll be put into flushing media, IVF flushing media, pH buffered, and then transported on ice, which secures that the temperature is always around 0 degrees, to our laboratory where we are waiting, and then freezing the tissue. You can see the rationale is, of course, that we want any woman who may otherwise be deprived the chance of having ovarian tissue freezing for having this option. And of course, we are not doing so many cases in Denmark, so obviously if we centralize the expertise, we'll be better at doing it, and then we'll do it more often. And it do turn out, which is a very important parameter in this context, and that is that the pool of follicles is pretty resistant to an ischemic period before transplantation. So they don't die if you transport them. The really big issue is after transplantation. So you can transport them without a big issue. Of course, if you look at it from the patient's perspective, she will receive the gonototoxic treatment in the local hospital. So the ovarian tissue will be removed at the local hospital and then transported where it will be stored in liquid nitrogen. And then if she wants to have it transplanted, the tissue is on liquid nitrogen, taken back to the local hospital where transplantation will be performed. Of course, if you look at it from the patient's perspective, she has just received a very devastating and potentially deadly diagnosis, and of course is emotionally distressed. And then on top of that, she needs to take into consideration, do I want my fertility to be saved for a future option of having kids? So she is perhaps not too keen to undergo a lot of extra stress and undergo surgery to preserve her fertility. She may actually be too sick to travel to a different hospital to have this procedure performed. And indeed, if the doctors may need to put her into the antineoplastic treatment immediately so that she don't have time to do that. And of course, in case of children, it all becomes more complicated with parents and so on. So obviously, this is a benefit to the patient who can stay in her local environment and be counseled by a fertility doctor at a local hospital, and then the ovary is taken out, which is a pretty straightforward operation. If you look at from the referral center, those who actually then deal with the patient, they don't need to establish this cryopreservation procedure. They can just talk to the patient and explain the risk of being infertile, and then they will do IVF in the meantime. So they will only do this part-time work with fertility preservation. And they don't need to have staff available to deal with this procedure. Often it is that everything is very well planned in the IVF lab, and you often have very limited time, maybe just the next day, to do an ovarian tissue freezing. And then you would have to reschedule plans and so on. So it may be a lot easier for the referral center just to send it off, and they don't need to look into subs and all the other things related to that. The central laboratory, of course, can organize the expertise and getting good at this and concentrate on this and be part of the development and do research. And this is now also an important part because this is still early days in the development of this technique. If you look at this picture, then it demonstrates the 4 referral centers that we have. You can see that the white bar is from Jutland. They are very well organized, and they send us a lot of tissues. And we have the black bars are our local hospital, and then we have 2, one in Sweden and another hospital. But you can see that all of them contribute with ovarian tissue to us. This is the over the years, the number of cryopreservations and the number of transplantations. The blue one are cryopreservations, the orange ones are transplantations. And you can see that on the left-hand side, this is cryopreservation. So we do around 100 a year. This is more or less what we're ending up at. And we do between 15 and 20 transplantations every year. So this comes out to that around 20 cryopreservations of ovarian tissue is performed per million inhabitant per year in Denmark. And I estimate that we are probably covering maybe between 60 and 75% of all what is needed. If you look at the different diagnoses which receive ovarian freezing, then you can see that it differs depending on the age of the patient. And of course, if you have the very young patients, then leukemia, sarcoma, and brain tumors are frequent. We know that this happens very often. This is the tumors that you see in childhood. And if you see the frequencies, they actually correlate very nicely with the frequency that these cancers occur in the different age groups. You can see Morbus Hodgkin is prevalent between 16 and 18. And you can see as the women get older and reach 25, 30 years, 30 to 40 years, then breast cancer indeed do take over. But a lot of different diseases altogether. This is the age distribution of the patients that we freeze and the mean number of cortex that you get. And the ovarian volume is also, you can see that at the bottom. But we do have a lot of patients. We have now more than 200 patients which are below the age of 18. So a lot of young patients is also coming. Now I would like to turn to show you some data which we published 2 years ago now in Human Reproduction on the survival, the quantitative survival of follicles which are present in human ovarian tissue when we freeze it. We use the neutral red. This is a vital dye which somehow accumulates in viable follicles. So you can see there, this is cortical tissue. You can see all these here are primordial follicles which selectively take up neutral red. So this shows that these follicles are viable. And if you take red, fresh tissue and then stain for neutral red and associate that to the number of follicles that you can find in this piece or these pieces of tissue after you have made histology, then there's a beautiful linear correlation. So in fresh tissue, almost all follicles are viable. The way we then do it is that we take out frozen thawed tissue. Here we have 2 pieces. We chop them up on the chopper, and then you get very fine distributed small pieces of tissue which you put in a solution of neutral red like this. And then afterwards you can actually see that here you can see the red follicles. Then you would count these follicles and say, oh, here is 17. Then this tissue would be embedded in agar and fixed and then cut up for histology. And then in histology, you can count all follicles present, also the dead ones in this piece of tissue. And then you make the association between number of follicles in the red tissue and the total number. And then that fraction is the survival rate. If we look at ovarian fresh tissue, then it will turn out that around 91% of all follicles are viable. And if we look at frozen thawed tissue, then we have evaluated 25 different patients, several pieces for each patient. You can see all the primordial follicles here. But this comes up to 84%. So this is just a reduction of 7%, which very nicely demonstrates that the quantitative survival from slow freezing is very good. It's just a reduction of 7 follicles. So, and if you look at over the storage time here, you can see that there's samples which has been stored in liquid nitrogen for 1 year and all the way up to 18 years. And the survival rate is absolutely straight. So there is no decrease in amount of follicles that is surviving this procedure. So as long as it's in liquid nitrogen, we can keep it for as long as we like. And if we look at those which have been transported on ice compared to our local hospital, then you can also see that the average is absolutely similar. so we can transport the follicles at least for 5 hours, as we do in Denmark, without jeopardizing survival rate. And obviously, it is almost all follicles that survive. So irrespective of what vitrification may provide in survival, it doesn't matter too much because it's almost all which survive anyway. But we are now actually conducting a study where we're comparing the two methods using neutral red to see if there is a difference between the two methods. Then I would like also to show you data from a study which we did 1.5 years ago, where we looked at the time from referral to ovarian tissue cryopreservation in a cohort of Danish women. So what we looked at was all patients which we had referred from 2015 to 2018, and then we looked at the time when we had the first contact by the referral center saying, can you freeze the tissue? And then the number of days it took before we actually undertook the cryopreservation. So how long should the patient wait to have her tissue frozen? And you can see here that in total it took 9 days. But if it was malignant tumors, severe malignant tumors, pelvic cancers, hematological cancers, sarcomas, or central nervous system cancers, then it was a lot lower, 5-6 days. CNN and other cranial, they had a little longer. In total, 6.7 days. Of course, breast cancers, they are not so aggressive, and often it takes longer, 9 to almost 10 days, and non-malignant had a lot longer. But it's interesting to notice that we can actually do this now with just on an average of 5 to 6 days if you have severe malignancies. If you compare that to oocyte vitrification, which is often the alternative method that people would consider for fertility preservation, this would take perhaps 11 days for ovarian stimulation, and then another 2 days before the ovaries was taken out, 13 to 14 days. So obviously the patient is very worried at this point, and she wants to have this procedure performed as fast as possible so that she can continue to have her cancer treatment. And I think that ovarian tissue actually qualifies in this aspect as well. We also get a lot of other interesting data out from this program. We have now been able to measure the ovarian volume very accurately. We know that exactly 1 gram of ovarian tissue corresponds to 1 milliliter of ovarian tissue. So we have now, in 765 women, been able to obtain a very precise estimate of the ovarian volume. Not 2D ultrasound, not 3D ultrasound. We actually have the accurate volume. And we have associated that to AMH, LH, FSH, and testosterone, and then use different cutoff values, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12 millimeters to see how this comes out. And you can see here that it's interesting that 10 milliliter is often used in connection with PCOS diagnosis. Actually, from patients like this, 21% have an ovarian volume which is larger than 10 milliliter if you measure it very accurately. And you can see that it actually comes out this way. And if you associate the volume with AMH, there's highly significant associations. So the bigger the ovary, the more AMH, which of course reflects that you have more follicles. You have an ovarian volume and the ratio of LH, FSH, which is also an indicator for PCOS, and again, a very significant association, and also for total testosterone. So ovarian volume is indeed associated to the parameters of PCOS, but 10 milliliter is not any particularly well-suited cutoff value. You can see here, this is 10 milliliter. I know that this is very busy, and you can see that indeed the LH is higher, and the ratio is higher, and the AMH is higher. But it's not like that 10 milliliter is a magic number. It changes just over the, as you would expect any biological phenomenon to occur, that more and more will be available. But 10 is not anything magic. So this is something which we have just published in Fertility this year. Then the 2-for-1 concept. I think that this is also interesting. Here is the cortical tissue, and here's the surplus medulla tissue. When you chop this up and start to look for oocytes, you will find that this will contain the antral follicles like this. These are visible. You will also have a lot of smaller follicles which are not quite visible. Here's an corpus luteum, but if you look, you will find lots of oocytes there. It's surprising. We have actually that these will be immature, and they do come out very different morphology. Here is large COCs and smaller ones, but if you mature them, you actually have a chance here to obtain metaphase 2 oocytes, which will indeed be a surplus to the woman in her endeavor to become fertile later on. Here is a study which we have just had published in JAR this year, 25 consecutive patients, 28 years, in volume of 9. We actually collected on average 36 oocytes per ovary. We don't have that average now because there was, in this group, there was 2 PCO ovaries where we obtained more than 100 oocytes per ovary. But 11 of them matured, which corresponds to a maturation rate of 31. But on average, having 11 metaphase 2 oocytes on top of your cortical tissue is not a bad thing. And this just comes out without any additional cost. So I do believe that the ESHRE guideline on fertility preservation now strongly recommend that you also start collecting these immature oocytes. In Denmark, we have produced 26 children. And as you probably know, the graph here from Jacques Dunet and Marina Dolman's paper, where we have more than 130 babies born worldwide. And you will perhaps say, oh, but you have transplanted more than 100 patients. Are you only having 26 children? Yes, we do. But I think we have also taken the opportunity in Denmark to exploit the limits of this technique, because people don't pay anything. So if we had a patient who were really eager to have her tissue frozen, who she may have been 38 or even 40 years, we have said, okay, but your chances are reduced. Are you still interested? And if they were, we have done it. And this means that the patients we transplant are much older than other clinics. And of course, then it doesn't work as well. But of course, this is one opportunity to figure out what are the limits of this technique. And I think we do try to work on that in Denmark. And then we'll have to acknowledge that maybe we won't get all the pregnancies that other people do. I'll just show you a video here on how the transplantation is performed. This is the ovary, the postmenopausal ovary in the uterus, and here's a peritoneal pocket prepared. And here is the cortical tissue then positioned one by one next to one another. And you can see we just make sure that the surface is flat underneath the pocket so that they are able to have a fast revascularization. Maybe I can just go a little fast here. You can see here they are. A lot of them are now positioned, and then we would then make sure that you can see them sit here now flat against the underlying surface, and then it's just been stitched together. Here you see the tissue, and then you do nice revascularization, a lot of vessels around them, and then you can just leave it there, and then the tissue will start to work. I just want to show you also that we have a lot of rare genetic diseases, which we are now looking at: thalassemia, POI, Turner syndrome, galactosemia, sickle cell anemia, Franconis anemia, and different sex chromosome abnormalities, and osteopetrosis. So these are also coming around and having a risk of being infertile because they may lose their fertility. I just want to show you that we published 2 years ago that we transplanted a tissue to a woman who suffered from beta thalassemia, and the tissue was then recovered when she was 9 years, truly prepubertal. She came to Denmark, had the tissue transplanted, and then she delivered by IVF in some years ago. And it's just to show you that the girls with thalassemia, if you look at the follicular density, of course, you can see that the colored dots all represent thalassemia or sickle cell anemia, and the follicular density is similar to our control group, which have not received any kind of treatment beforehand. So it is worthwhile to freeze tissue from these. We have also been looking into Turner syndrome patients. This is a hot topic at the moment. Should we do this or should we do this not? We have actually had a collaboration with the people in Edinburgh and in Melbourne, and had been looking at 15 girls, young with thalassemia. And again, you can see all the dots here, most of them. So these would be the ones who are mosaic Turner syndromes. They are actually also within the norm range. So they do have follicles. And if we look at them and look for AMH, GDF9, BMP15, IGF-BP4, PAM-A, and stannylcansin 2, you can see that these mosaic Turner syndrome patients actually do show nice expression similar to what you see in a control. So at least some of the follicles which are present in these ovaries are okay. So we haven't transplanted any of this tissue. So of course it has to be considered an experimental technique at this point in time. But we of course we need to do that to show that it works. And we will have to do that in the future. But if we don't ask them to have the tissue frozen, we won't get the experience. And indeed, these data do suggest that these women will have some function of follicles, but this is something we have to look into. And the question now is, should we freeze from these girls or should we not freeze from these girls? Again, the Danish system allows us to do it as long as the parents and the girls are interested, and then we will obtain the information in some years. So in conclusion, I would like to finish off by concluding that it is now feasible to freeze ovarian tissue from both adult and children. We do it differently in children. We certainly do not take out very much cortical tissue, but leave all the tissue there because it's stuffed with follicles for the child to benefit from. It is also now becoming apparent that we can transplant ovarian tissue to women where the tissue was frozen when there were pre-pubertal. It do work. We have at least 3 or 4 girls now where the tissue have started to work and they were truly pre-pubertal in the Danish cohort. IVM and the 2-for-1 concept is now coming on board big time, I think. And I think that we should all try to work on this. Of course, we again are still are down on very solid data on this to show, are we getting as many babies as we would do with normal IVM? This is certainly follicles which are smaller in diameter, but it's worthwhile pursuing. Genetic diseases like thalassemia, Turner syndrome, and sickle cell anemia are also patients where there's no risk of transplanting the tissue, and indeed they would benefit from it. So I think that we should also be aware of the fact that this new technique actually also provides a lot of basic science information about human ovarian physiology, because we do have the organ in our hands, which is also of interest. This is my lab. You can see that here we have the people. Stine is doing the work, a lot of work. Here's Shu from Japan, who did the work on the ovarian volume. This is the testis tissue. This is our follicle guys. Jesus from Spain, and we have Susanne and Lynn and a lot of other students on the lab. Thank you very much for your attention.
Claus, it was really an excellent presentation. Really, thank you very much. And I have some questions for you, but first of all, this presentation was seen by thousands of people, and probably lots of them asking themselves, how do I start this program? What do I need to do in order to get such a good results? You know, there are lots of people who are looking for fertility preservation for social reason, for cancer reason, thousands around the world. So what you recommend to them? Well, they all want to have such a good results.
Yeah, I think, Steph, I think that what we recommend people to do is to try and get hold of bovine ovaries. You can, if you go to a slaughterhouse or you have affiliated vet, they will be able to obtain a lot of fresh bovine ovaries. The size and the texture of ovarian tissue from bovines are almost similar to human, not always, and in humans it do vary a lot. And if you do that, then you have an opportunity to get started, and you have to sit and work, and it do take a lot of practice. But if you have a lot of cow ovaries, you can do that. And then at some point when you have done 10, 15 ovaries, you will be able to get that 1 millimeter thin cortical tissue, which is really the clue, is to make sure that you make that thin enough. And then it's you have to put it into cryoprotectants and so on. And most people working in the IVF lab will be pretty familiar with that. But getting the feeling of, or the get it into your hands that you have to make it this 1 millimeter thick is the really essential. And then I mean, there's various workshops if you are interested where you can go and learn the technique, but you can also see the videos that we have presented, and the thickness is the important parameter.
Good. Okay. I want to ask you, there is a lot of controversies regarding the procedure, because still in some of the countries it seems to be like it's not approved yet and it's an experimental procedure. But if you have to choose, what is the cutoff point regarding age where you think it would be better to cryopreserve ovary or to stimulate the patients to recruit eggs? At what age you don't think you will be able to actually recruit oocytes and you need to do a cryopreservation of the ovaries?
That's an excellent question, Steph, because obviously we do see a lot of women who's getting in their mid-30s who's I haven't got the kids I want, or they have a disease, and what do they want to do? And as I said, this is one of the opportunities we have had in Denmark, is to say, oh, but she is older than 35, which is the normal age limit that we say. Below that, they have to be below that, because above that, the pool of follicles which is available in the ovary is down to perhaps 1 digit, 3, 4, 5% of what it was when they started out. So there's not a lot of follicles, and maybe there's too little to provide fertility when we transplant the tissue. Whereas if you are able to get some mature oocytes, but of course you won't get a lot, but perhaps if you have the time, you may be able to do more than one ovarian stimulation and then collect mature oocytes. So I think that the age limit that I would start out with now, if I started a new program, I would say 35 max. And then depending on how the ultrasound scan of the ovaries would look, I would make a decision on whether to go for ovarian stimulation or to go for ovarian tissue freezing, depending on how they look.
Are you looking also for AMH? You know, do you have?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, no, I'm sorry I didn't mention that. No, AMH indeed, Steph, is also a very important parameter. The more, the better, simply.
Right. It's an ethical question now. What are you doing with the tissue of patients who are no longer with us, or the disease progressing and you cannot replace them back to the patients?
No, this is of course also something which is very delicate and which you need to deal with big take care of that in a good manner. The way we have organized this in Denmark is if the patient turns out to die, and we do see that. I think that perhaps 10% of our patients end up dying. Then the agreement with the patient is that then we will saw out the tissue and then we will fix it, or we'll kill the tissue. We can't take it for weighing or histology, but it's dead so that nobody can use it for reproductive purposes. And obviously, there's also patients who are too sick to have the tissue transplanted, and then what we do is that we return to the patients when they turn 40, and then say, well, now you turned 40, are you sure you do not want to use your tissue? And if some are saying, well, some also don't become menopausal or have had the kids they want because the ovary was still working, and then they would say, but you can use our tissue for research purposes, or you can destroy it. So we actually sort of engage the patients in these decisions, and it is the patient who decides what she wants to do with her tissue.
Okay, thank you. And I want to ask you, obviously you have a registry in Denmark, a very organized program in Denmark. Do you think there should be a registry for ovarian tissue cryopreservation in Europe, worldwide, or parts of any kind of societies to follow up still this procedure?
Yeah, indeed, this would be a very good idea, I think. It's just, you know, we have now frozen tissue for more than 1,200 patients, and there's a lot of other large centers where, I mean, we won't be able to put them into a registry. We should have started this years ago, but it is really sad that we weren't able, either in the context of the International Society for Fertility Preservation or ASRM or ESRA, to put up a registry, because of course we would be able to get a lot of very valuable information out of this. I had a student 1.5 years ago where I asked her to go through all published data on freezing of ovarian tissue and transplantation of ovarian tissue. And obviously this was a massive undertaking, and this is then only those which are published. So we are missing all the very important information that we would have if we had a registry. I don't know if it's too late, but it's also a matter of how do you convince people to use that extra energy to put all their cases in. But I certainly think we are missing out on a lot of information by not having a registry.
And I want to finish my questions with something related to quality of life and pre or postmenopausal patients. I know that this was mentioned several times in different congresses, but is it practical? You think it will be practical, or do you have any experience with cryopreservation for tissue for patients specifically to replace it during menopause period?
Yes, this is requested. And obviously, this is a very delicate matter to use ovarian tissue taken out in the young years to postpone menopause later on. And indeed, I do not suggest this is something that everybody should do. If there is a medical indication in a family, if a woman, for instance, have seen her mother and aunt and family members become very osteoporotic and be very having a poor life quality, then perhaps this could be an option for some patients that or some people. They may not be patients because they may be very well, to take out tissue, store it, and then replace it when they get to menopause, and then they will get the whole armamentarium of hormones to support osteoporosis, avoid cardiovascular disease, and HRT are not able to provide the same protection. So I do think that this is something we should consider. I think this is very early days in this context, and we need to. I think we need to get the experience. And I mean, we have done 1,200 cases now where the ovarian tissue is frozen. I'm sure that some of these will have been through POI. And I'm sure that perhaps we could replace the tissue to some of these patients just to alleviate menopausal symptoms, not for them to become pregnant because they probably are too old. And I mean, we have been doing that in 10 patients. They were not menopausal, they weren't above the age of 50, but they came to us and said, oh, I have my tissue in the tank, Claus, can you put it back? Because I just don't want to be menopausal. I just want to have my regular menstrual cycles. And they do undertake this task very efficiently, the tissue do. And I just think this is a new option, and I think it is, we need something new in the HRT arena, which is more which are providing a better protection against some of these menopause-related diseases. But we have to do it with caution, and we have to discuss it thoroughly.
Claus, thank you very much. And on behalf of our colleagues and our friends, I want to thank you very much for your time and for an excellent presentation. And again, thank you very much for it.
Thank you very much for having me on board.